Hello and welcome back to OT, the podcast. We're here to talk about watches, time, and how to spend it. I'm Andy Green.
And I'm a ridiculously excited Felix Schultz.
Felix, I'm pumped up as well.
This is going to be great.
We've got a very, very special guest tonight, or today, I should say.
Yep.
He's a former military athlete,
Whoa.
a keen sportsman,
Whoa.
an architect and interior designer by trade.
Who is this man?
He's the CEO of one of the world's biggest watch brands.
Oh, I know who it is now.
Yeah, Mr. Christoph Grainger-Herr,
Yeah.
the CEO of IWC.
This is a real treat. And this is a perfect coincidence because what's on your wrist?
Absolute perfect timing. We're days out from Watches and Wonders. I happen to be wearing an IWC Portugieser Chronograph, which has never received so much attention on Instagram.
But not just any. This is the new one, isn't it?
This is the new one.
With the integrated movement.
The sexy new one. So much attention, in fact, that one of our female listeners asked me for a little bit of advice on IWC.
I don't think you should answer that question. I think we should get Chris Grainger to.
Sounds like a plan.
Let's get him on the line.
Let's do it.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of OT, the podcast. Before we kind of get into the media questions, it'd be great if you could just tell us, a little bit about yourself and your background.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Chris Grainger. I'm the CEO for IWC Schaffhausen watches in Switzerland. I've done this job for just over 3 years now, and I've been with the company for just over 13 years, I guess. Starting as a designer, actually an interior designer by trade. Started off actually with the company doing museums and shops and exhibitions. Then went way through different aspects of marketing, sort of finding out that it's just better as a designer if you can decide and influence more of the identity of a brand, and in the end ended up with this job, which really gives you, I guess, that 360 view, and I enjoyed tremendously bringing both the brand and the products together and the whole storytelling around it.
Yeah, fantastic. So you're 3 years into the job as CEO with quite the background. How is it going?
No, it's brilliant. I've enjoyed tremendously the whole. It's a very dynamic situation globally, obviously, facing across different markets, but also the fact that this is a period where really globalization, in terms of the cultural connection and in terms of the way that people are interacting with each other, is really exciting. And it's exciting for how this is expressed. And in any sort of design lifestyle product, I think the influences coming into a brand like IWC are probably fundamentally different from what it would have been 10, 15 years ago. And that development is so dynamic, and all the additional inputs through all of the social media channels and all the closer interaction with our clients really does make a much more exciting world overall compared to what it would have been a few years ago.
Fantastic. So what would you say the most rewarding thing about, being the leader, being the CEO of IWC is, and maybe your greatest achievement to date?
Well, I think it's far too early after 3 years to talk about greatest achievements. And we're trying to build a brand that at the end of the day is here to bring a experience to our clients. That's what we're all. It's the only reason you're working. Some key workers in the health system. We make mechanical luxury watches. So what you do, you support the emotional side, people's dreams, people's time away from the practicalities of when they do something which is really for a pleasurable experience. And at the end of the day, what is most rewarding for me is to see that side of the business when our clients really have their lives touched by our product, the experience they have with us, and to see our colleagues, the amount of passion that goes into these products, from watchmaking to the way that our events are created, to the way that people interact with our clients, and everybody doing this because they love the brand, they love the product. That leading in the end of the day to people having a positive experience in their lives, that is for sure the most rewarding part of the job. And then beyond that, I think what we were fortunate enough to celebrate 150 years a couple of years ago with IWC, seeing that Jones's original dream of crossing the Atlantic and setting up this international watch company here in Switzerland really has paid off and really has become a reality. And to be able to open a new huge center here in Schaffhausen that I was fortunate over the last 6-7 years, and seeing how that brings together the engineering, the watchmaking, the in-house watch movements coming out, and the experience for our clients to come here. I think that's probably been sort of the highlight for me.
Fantastic. So obviously it's a little bit early for you to, talk about those great achievements. What are your dreams for the brand then?
Well, it's exactly that. I think, we make a product that intrinsically is very sustainable, and this is a great strength of mechanical watches. It's something which is made to last forever, which is done and sourced, made in a responsible way, and really supports not only all the jobs, but it supports the craft base in Europe here of skills that are otherwise, very lost in mechanical watchmaking, mechanical engineering, metal technology, all of the things that keeping alive, where we're training young people to have a future in those sorts of jobs, makes that a very sustainable industry. And I think it's something that in the end, because it tells us, it talks about a way of consuming, because it's not electronic dispose of every couple of years and that we constantly have to hope to have an everlasting things. It's a different way of conscious way of consuming. And I think that's quite a powerful message at this moment in time. And I hope that going forward, that we can develop a different way of consuming things that we can genuinely feel good about and that we can genuinely enjoy, and that are a lot of emotion and a lot of passion that just bring that element of dreaming, of positivity, of joy to our lives. That we so definitely.
Yeah, I love that. You're obviously very passionate about watchmaking, and I guess I want to know, what do you look for in a watch personally?
Well, for me, it's like any great piece of design. You have at the end of you want something that emotionally touches you and that feels relevant every single day you own it and you interact with it. That's a fundamental difference compared to fashion at the end of the day, where you have something that has a hype, has a moment, and it fades away and it goes and you forget about it. Real great, whether it's in architecture or whether it's in cars or anything, something that feels modern and of the moment for many, many years, every day of the year. That's what we're looking for here. What we're looking for is something like when you look at our new collection, the Portugieser, we have a design that was essentially created in the mid 1930s, but that feels as crisp, fresh, relevant, and beautiful in every day following its original creation. You never feel it's gone out of fashion, but it's timeless and it's elegant. And that is at the end of the day what makes you enjoy a product when you touch it every day of your life. And this is, I think, ultimately what I'm looking for in a mechanical watch.
Chris, I find that really interesting, what you're saying about sort of the timeless nature of watches and how it differs from fashion. Do you find any sort of tension there with that, I guess, need to sort of release an annual collection and to keep on refreshing things?
I think it's the necessary balance, and it's a good balance. When you look at, I think what is important is that you have a great continuity in your icons, in your DNA, and in your values, and at the heart of the brand. But at the same time, not just both in products and communication and the way we do interaction with our clients, retailing, and so on. You need a freshness and innovation as well. And I don't think those things are a contradiction. It's just a balance you need to keep, where I'd roughly say have a 60% roughly continuity, where you really have, like we have in, it's a very incremental, iterative development over time. I often a little bit sort of, it's a little bit the Porsche 911 effect, where from 1964 to today, yes, the change is massive, but every incremental change doesn't feel like a big change, and it's always recognizable as what it is, the icon, the 911. And that's essentially what we're doing at the heart of our brand. And then you have the sort of areas around that where we have our sports watches, our other collections, where I think it really adds to the brand to bring freshness, to bring newness, to bring different animals, and keep evolving.
Yeah, fantastic. So it's almost like a sustainability through timelessness, inspired by this great design of the past. And I think we should probably touch on your love for the automotive world.
It's not just great design of the past, it's great design of any time. I think the point, we often have this discussion in design as well. How do you make something iconic? How do you create an icon? And the fact is, you don't. You create designs where most of the time you have no idea which way it's going to go. It's a little bit like, how do you create a piece of content that's going to go viral? You just don't know. It's, you can do the best job you can possibly do, and then see what happens. And I think this is the fact for a lot of the designers. I was thinking back, a couple of days ago, when the Portuguese line started. Back in the 30s, you had two Portuguese importers who came to Schaffhausen and they said, look, we see a trend at the moment for bigger wristwatches, precision in our market in Portugal. Can you make something like that? And clearly created the 325 back in the day. And later, surely the same for the Portuguese chronograph. I don't think involved in this process, or even that first retailer in Odessa in Ukraine who actually ordered the first Portuguese and sold it. None of these people had probably any idea that they were onto something which is going to be one of the most recognized designs in the watch. Not at all. And that's when you're creative, when you're designing, you can keep your principles in mind, how you go about the process. But at the end of the day, you cannot force the creation of on Monday morning. It just happens or it doesn't.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and you've sort of snookered us on the next question because we were going to lead into the Portugueser, but you've obviously seen the direction we're going. For me, though, I think one of the really interesting moments in the life cycle of the Portugueser is in 1993, when I guess we saw its return to IWC. Can you talk a little? I mean, and maybe that's not about creating that iconic design, but it's recognizing an opportunity when you see it. Can you tell me a little bit about the more recent history of the line?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when you look at the recent milestones, as you correctly said, 1993 marked the 125th year anniversary of IWC. And at the time, Günter Blümlein and the team around him decided to launch two main products to mark the occasion. One was the ultra complicated Il Destriero Scafusia, which was based on the Grand Competition design. And then the idea was to revive something probably a little bit more accessible to regular watch lovers. And they've recreated that 325, which had been phased out a couple of years previously in the 80s, and created a watch which would be called Portugieser for the first time, based on the DNA of the 325 and the Portuguese gentleman who originally specified the watch. Previously, I think in IWC it was just known as the big wristwatch, which is was a to calling the big pilot, I guess. And this was called Portugieser then, and I think it hit that moment when the kind of oversized look in wristwatches back in the 90s became a thing in Central Europe, and that meant that with the distribution landscape of the time, IWC enjoyed an immediate hit. And obviously, this was super beautiful as well because it had the caliber watch movement in the back, beautifully decorated, 14 lines with that anniversary message on the back, 1868 to 1993. And there were 3 editions, both in steel, golden, and platinum of that watch. And they became an instant hit, and it's still very sought after till the present day. And from there on, I think IWC knew that they were onto something, which then led to first the Portuguese chronograph Rattrapante hand wound in the mid 90s, and then later on to the Portuguese chronograph that we know today, which became such an icon relatively quickly. When you think that many of these watch designs had been around for a lot longer, Portuguese chrono, though it's based on the 325, still has its very own identity with that Reo inner bezel that's up the dial nicely, and that counter alignment of the 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock sub counters. It's very specific. That's been an immediate success, and I think from there onwards, it was clear that if there is going to be a major development, we wanted to add the complications to the line, because up to that point, it's basically been hand wound and automatic chronograph watches. And then we introduced Kurt Klaus's ingenious perpetual calendar in 2003. And that really was the point then to develop that whole.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's a really interesting watch. I actually happen to be wearing a Portuguese chronograph with the black dial. What a coincidence! And I got to say, I love how nice it is and how refined the kind of balance between the brushed and the polished elements of the case, especially, and the way it wears much smaller than I was initially expecting. The only issue is that Florian wants it back next week, so otherwise, I love it.
That you just do a runner. We're used to that.
Straight from the top.
We've got permission there. That's wonderful. I think by the time this podcast goes live, I think the whole world will have seen the lovely new Portuguese releases. that you've come up with for this year. Can you sort of maybe talk us through the new collection a little bit?
Of course. So really, I mean, we've given the historic background a little bit. You know, it's all about IWC's connection with water and with navigation that started with Jones crossing the Atlantic, and of course, not coincidentally, setting up IWC by the banks of a river to use that hydropower to give energy to his factory, and it's still the same hydropower that we're using today in great continuity, although not directly anymore with transmission belts, but instead directly from the plug sockets. But still, it's the same source of energy, and that really led to a reputation he developed very quickly for very precise pocket watch movements, which would become widely used as deck observation watches and navies both around the planet, and then inspired these gentlemen from Portugal to come and ask for marine chronometer precision in a wristwatch. And that really defined what the DNA of the Portugieser was going to be. And today I see three main lines of that new collection extension, which build directly on that. I think firstly, the iconic essence of the Portugieser, which is expressed in our new Portugieser automatic 40 millimeters, which is directly based on the 325. So it has the small second at 6 o'clock, time only, no date layout. It has the glass case back, albeit with an automatic movement rather than hand wound in the original Portugieser 1993. And obviously a modern dial layout, but still comes with very, very high-end in-house automatic movement with the 82 with peloton winding, ceramic clicks, and so on. Glass case back, and that very wearable size of 40 millimeters, which perfectly complements the 7 days automatic 42, which has a bit more of an instrument presence on the wrist. It really also marks the new, as it were, entry point to the Portugieser collection, which is positioned in terms of price just below the Portuguese chronograph. So it really complements the other models quite nicely there. Then secondly, we have the completely re-engineered Portuguese chronograph that you just spoke about, which is now featuring our column wheel 69 caliber in-house chronograph, sapphire glass caseback, and we have a completely redesigned strap and buckle system with a butterfly clasp for better sort of central ergonomic fit on the wrist, and bringing that in all the classic color codes, but also in two new interesting colors in the collection, which is the dark burgundy and the dark racing green. And that really sort of together with the new models on the 7 days automatic marks the sort of classic Portuguese icons. Then we have the second pillar, which is more the, say, sort of nautical instruments for the wrist, which are the complicated watches. So the same spirit, we're using the base caliber 82 and fitted it with a new version of Kurt Klaus's perpetual movement module, allowing us to create a 3 sub-counter perpetual calendar leap year indication at 42 millimeters and with a lesser height than the traditional perpetual calendar from IWC. So it's exactly the same approach in the PPC as it's in the automatic, where we're adding a slightly more wearable, smaller dimension PPC, very, very classic in its expression, but extremely wearable on the wrist, and just to complement that bigger classic 44 millimeter perpetual calendar. We're also doing this one now for the first time in the standard collection in stainless steel, and that fits nicely to the price position where our annual calendar sat previously in the collection. And then from there onwards, we have a whole range of what we call the boutique collection, which is a number of complications which come mainly in gold cases, blue dials, and woven calf leather straps that are directly inspired by sort of the nautical rope sort of image and things like that. You have everything in the automatics chronos, but you also have the big perpetual calendar single move special edition on that, and you have 2 complications where our key functions of chronograph and calendar are combined with flying tourbillons. So we have a tourbillon perpetual calendar with a flying tourbillon at 12 o'clock based on the 51 caliber movement. We have the tourbillon chronograph retrograde on the 89 flyback chrono, and that comes with a flying tourbillon at 6 o'clock with hacking tourbillon stop, and a special diamond shell technology there to reduce abrasion and retrograde date. And those are all limited to 50 pieces each, and we also do them in platinum with silver dial with 50 pieces. And then the third pillar and the final collection really is the Yacht Club. So the Yacht Club really represents a sport elegant chronograph that we now offer as a metal bracelet chronograph in the elegant section of IWC's portfolio, complementing the sports chronos on metal that we have in the pilots, the engineer, and so on. And with the Club. This is the third generation, first introduced by Christian Knober, our chief designer, in 2010. We started off with a sort of open dial, elegant 45mm version in 2010. We then resized it sort of just before I took over into a 43mm version, which I felt not got quite the same elegance in terms of proportion. And we've now 44mm, where we got the original, proportions back with a very open dial, the elegant thin bezel on it, and also the pusher crown configuration, which comes back to its original sort of slender proportions. We've tidied up the dial quite a bit, moved the date to the 6 o'clock position, toned down the red a little bit in the dial, and then put that on an all-new metal bracelet, which comes in stainless steel and in two-tone with golden steel, and also features a fine adjustment system at the clasp, allowing sort of 5mm adjustment on the wrist. And altogether, you have a really elegant, classic, yet sports waterproof Yacht Club here, which really, I think, brings back the essence of what this product line is meant to be. And also comes with a unique new complication, which is the Yacht Club automatic moon and tide. This would be especially relevant in Australia, where everybody lives within miles of the sea, or more or less everybody.
Yeah, very useful.
It's something that is quite unique. So there we combine the double moon indication at 12 o'clock for northern and southern hemisphere.
Yeah.
Again, very relevant for you guys. And we have a neat tide indication that shows, depending on the constellation of moon, earth, and sun, whether you have a more expressed or tide, and that is shown at 12 o'clock position. And then you have a high tide indicator at 6 o'clock that you can set to any location on the planet. And once you've set it to your location, it will run the tide cycles of 12 hours and 24 minutes correctly for that location. And then, of course, you can reset it if you change where you are on the planet. And I think that's a super useful and very elegant complication that comes on a Yacht Club automatic in gold, with a stunning blue dial and on a sort of combined textile and rubber cushion going strap with folding clasp. So again, I think a very interesting model within that range.
Yeah, I think for me that's a real highlight in the one of the highlights rather. It's a completely new complication for IWC. You've never done one a tide.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I must say, I wrote it up earlier today, and I did have to read the press release maybe 6 times to understand just how it works.
Jessica, this is
you-
criticism for you. Yeah.
it probably says more about me. Could you maybe explain how, from a watchmaking point of view, how that tide complication works?
It's basically it's linked to the timing module that drives the moon indication. So it's because the tides are obviously very much related to the moon cycle. It's a where we then translate that cycle into the actual tide cycles, which are obviously slightly offset. And the same as you have moon correction over time in the moon module, that's basically the same principle behind the tide module that is closely linked. The one bit that is technically quite challenging, though, is to make IWC. We always have a strong mantra to try and solve everything with as little crown and pushes as possible. We're not big fans of pushes and the like. So we've managed to make this all adjustable on the single crown at 3 o'clock. So this obviously has to cover both the moon date, high tide functions, etc. So it's not easy to solve that one, but we managed to have this all adjustable on the single crown, and it's a function I'm really excited about.
And sort of more broadly, I'm really happy to see the Yacht Club get a bit more attention. It sort of seems to have been an outlier in the past. Is this just the start of a more continued focus, or are you happy with where the Yacht Club line is at the moment?
No, absolutely. I think what is really important to me in terms of our collection architecture was to make sure that we define quite clearly what that Yacht Club represents in the portfolio. And we have a lot of sports and sports classic chronographs with the vintage feel, and the pilots with the technical feel and technical case materials and so on. And I think the point is that the Yacht Club is a sports elegant chronograph that really should fit a lot more in the premium elegant side of the portfolio, which you can't cover with a pilot's chronograph or with an aquatime chronograph. And this was for me where I really wanted to make sure that we express that properly. That's why you can find technical materials in that collection now, like titanium we had previously or things like that. That's really reserved for sports watches, but to find a metal on metal expression where you have something which can be absolutely worn with a suit as it can be out doing sports or being out on the boat, and just to make sure that that finds a proper place in the collection. And you'll see this over time with the kind of partnerships and versions and expressions we're going to launch on the Yacht Club, just to make sure that this really has a place in its portfolio where it has its own territory. We've seen,
Can't wait.
like we often do with these collections, that of course also in terms of awareness, it takes a number of years until design is sort of properly established, and really with bringing that continuity now of taking the Yacht Club to the case proportions where I think it needs to be. We do think that we can then build it much more sustainably.
Yeah, well, I know Felix is a very, very big fan of the Yacht Club models, as he mentioned.
Yeah.
It's really, really interesting to hear you kind of talk through these new pieces, especially mentioning the green dialed Portuguese chronograph, which
Yeah.
you called racing green. I know you're a big automotive enthusiast. You've touched on it a little bit.
You caught me.
We actually, yeah. Well, to be honest, we actually met briefly a couple of years ago at a Goodwood members meet.
Okay, yeah, that says it all.
I think Chris was paying attention to the cars more then.
Yeah, I wasn't interested in anything else.
There was a lovely goal wing, and I was nearby. I'm sure you remember.
I hope I didn't interrupt our interview for that.
No, but then you kind of touched on the size of the Yacht Club and how it sounds like you've had a bit of influence in the design. And I know that a lot of watch CEOs don't get involved with design and will just talk to the design. But you've been involved a little bit more involved than that?
Well, yeah, that's probably yeah. The thing is, to be honest, for me, you can do in a company like IWC,
Yep.
and how no matter how you approach it, at the end of the day, what makes or breaks the brand is the aesthetic and service expression, the personality of the brand to our clients. This is the only thing that matters. Is what do I say about the brand? What do the products say? What do our services say? What does the interaction say? And what do the people express who are working for IWC as our ambassadors, all our colleagues? Now, I think if you don't get involved in all of that as a CEO, then I'm not quite sure what you're doing apart from looking after the books. It's a bit of a philosophy thing, but I think this is essentially what drives a luxury brand. We're not an insurance product. We're not a product on simply efficiency. It's a holistic expression of a mindset through a very small and very complicated product. And I think if you're not involved in that, then yeah, okay, it's a different job profile, but it's definitely not what I could imagine for myself.
And on that point of size, I think it's the other thing that I was really happy to see and I find really striking is that smaller 40mm auto and also that slightly smaller perpetual calendar model. Is there? I'd really be interested to sort of hear your thoughts on how that keeps in line maybe with changing consumer tastes, but also honors that oversized spirit of the Portuguese line.
Yeah, exactly. I think you're absolutely right, and I don't think it's fundamentally just down to changing consumer tastes, but it's down to the reality of our different clients in different countries and their ergonomic sizes and preferences. And I think, as I said in the beginning, the DNA of the Portuguese is that oversized look, and this is what we always have to maintain, and why our perpetual calendars need to look different from our competitors' perpetual calendars in terms of their proportions. And I think what you will hopefully agree when you see the product physically is that with a 42 ppc, it's a lot more wearable in terms of its size, but it maintains those proportions. So when you wear it on your wrist and looks like a Portugueser, it's just not quite as big anymore. And I think that's where that balance has to be struck. Because if we were to make 39mm ultra thin, then I would agree it doesn't feel like an IWC anymore. You've lost that look and feel to it. And this is always for me where we have to stay very, very focused on that. But we do know that we have many clients around the world who will not be comfortable wearing over 1 thick 44mm perpetual calendar, who love the watch design, but who just don't feel comfortable wearing a watch of that size. And there, if we can offer models that are right where our clients are looking for in terms of dimension that still maintain the character and the timelessness of the Portugieser, I think that's an amazing complementary offering. And through our 82 caliber automatic, which is just considerably smaller than the 7 days 52 caliber, we are able to do that both in automatic and in PPC. And that allows us, everything we've done in the manufacturing center, to have an all in-house Portuguese line that features, for example, 3 distinct different in-house chronograph movements in one single collection and 2 automatics. So it's quite a package.
Chris, as a designer specifically, how hard is it for you to achieve that balance? Keeping the various markets happy. Obviously, you've got markets with much smaller wrist sizes on average than say other people. Felix has monster meat hook wrists, and mine are quite small. And I guess, how do you achieve that balance in these iconic designs without oversaturating the collection and having 4 different sizes of this, of the big pilot, for example, and staying true to the roots?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I think that the first key to this is always speaking to people, listening to people, and taking the interaction seriously, but at the same time understanding what your brand is and what it isn't. And I think one of the riskiest things you can do with a luxury brand or a strong emotional brand is to try to be all things to all people. You can't do that. You have to have a clear positioning and a clear line. But within that clear line that we just discussed, it's important to see how you can fit in as many realities of markets and consumers as possible. And that's what we're trying to do. And that's why when we started to experiment with smaller sizes perpetual calendars, we said, okay, let's find a case size where I put it on my wrist and it looks and feels like a Portugieser. And then if we can slot that into a collection that makes sense, and then of course I will have people in some countries, you explained it, Australia, or typically also Latin America, Mexico, places like that, people are really, really happy to wear big, tall instrument watches. And they're hopefully not going to be offended by the Portuguese 42, but at the same time,
Yeah.
people who love that design who will say, oh, finally, it's a size where I can actually wear it. We have big pilot collectors who've never worn a big pilot. They love the design. They can't wear 46 millimeters. And you go like, well, that's a shame, isn't it? Because you've got all these watches, not putting them on. And that, if I can stay on the, within the core of the DNA and what the collection needs to be, but still make those watches accessible to people who haven't previously worn them, then of course that's a win-win.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I agree. And I think that, as you mentioned, good design will always be good design. You mentioned that you listen to people and listen to the community. I know you've got a big social media presence. I've heard rumors that you've attended a few watch get-togethers and collectors
Yeah.
meets. How exactly do you listen, and how involved are you?
Well, as I say, it's a big risk when you're stuck inside a company, a business, a brand. You develop your own reality, and I think it's very to have that continuously challenged by people's perspectives that you don't always have to agree with. And I'm quite honest, I don't always agree with the input. I don't always agree with comments on social media, but at the same time, you feel not only your own perspective and your own conviction, but actually what of that inner thinking actually makes it to the mind of one of our clients. Because at the end of the day, anything that we do that is not felt in any way by our clients is a complete waste of time. Right? So it's just important, I think, to use that mirror time and again of different realities, different perceptions and feedbacks and cultural contexts to really make sure that you get as full a picture of your own brand as you possibly can. And then after that, it's a creative and brand shaping decision process of where you say, okay, what of this do I take on board? What do I believe in? And what am I going to do at the end of the day? I think this is also in the luxury industry one of the fundamentals. It's not a crowdsourcing exercise. It's not a research data analytics exercise. All of that helps, but at the end of the day, the creative process, I don't think any design icon in the world has been created in a very democratic way. At the end of the day, it's a moment of creation.
Designed
Great
by a
idea.
committee.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not designed by committee, definitely not. This is really where that balance is. That at the end of the day, you just have to come up with a very cool one.
Yeah. I think we're going to sort of change tack in a second, but I've just got one more question about the Portuguese family. And it's about that burgundy and those racing green dials. I think they're possibly the funkiest colours I've seen on an IWC outside of maybe your dive watches, especially for something dressy. Where is this energy coming from, and what's the sort of impetus for that?
Well, I can give you the actual story, but I'm not sure.
I think you should.
So clearly, for example, I mean, the racing green actually comes from a couple of special editions that we've done in previous years, and then we tried a couple of years ago. We put the green color on the standard pilot's chronograph.
Yeah.
We saw how extremely well that color interacts with our iconic designs, and this obviously transfers onto a couple of other watches as well. And we just have to say, wow, actually that green brown combination or the green black combination works extremely well and is a color animation that we've seen is tremendously well accepted in the market, and it seemed logical to bring that into the Portugieser line as a color animation. With Burgundy, it's a little bit of a different story because as actually this comes from a sartorial discussion from midway through half year, I think, where I was discussing with a friend of mine, sort of the trends that we see in gentlemen's tailoring and so on. And this is somebody who dresses quite a few of the sports stars. And I can't remember when exactly that was, but we were just talking about the instant moment where a lot of the very classically conservatively dressed guys were suddenly having burgundy suits made. Try to understand it. Dinner jackets popped up everywhere, etc. And these were people not fashionistas. These were people with a really, really traditional dress sense.
Yeah, right.
Who suddenly increased interest in the color burgundy, aubergine, and all those colorways. And I think this is when we started to bounce around the ideas of, okay, would burgundy work on a watch? And then, of course, the first watch where we put that physically into action was in the Lewis Hamilton last year, where we had the design discussion with Lewis. And this came back to Lewis being a big fan of purple and burgundy, but also that in his race outfits that he wears with these customized caps in different GPs in the season, there was a very strong one last year with that contrast of burgundy and white on the Mercedes cap that he wears, and it's actually that that really started me thinking about burgundy color codes in different families, and then of course us starting to try out the burgundy. The idea for the color animation really is to bring that into collection for a certain period of time, not as limited edition, but as really color animation, and then being able to refresh the collection over time.
Yeah, that's a really interesting backstory. And I mean, when I first looked at it, the first thing I thought of again was tailoring, like you mentioned, and probably a stylist that has been following that same trend, Alara Urbanati, I think is her name. Felix will know a little bit better, and she happens to dress Jane Johnson. Actually,
Yeah, she works with I think a lot of guys in Hollywood, specifically guys, and also seems to do a fair bit with IWC. She's a very good account to follow, but yeah, she's done some really nice. I think it was who did burgundy suits there.
The Rock's definitely won a lot. Childish Gambino's won a lot.
Yeah.
But I mean, I mentioned The Rock because he's, as you said, Felix, he's sported quite a lot of IWC pieces, big pilots, which I guess is our next key point and something I want to break into. We've talked a lot about the new pieces, but what I think drew me initially to IWC is the big pilot, and as you said, it's a watch that personally it's too big for me, but it's got this sort of cult following around it, and this, I guess, halo of just coolness and interest. Orlando Bloom, The Rock, Jude Law, Bradley Cooper, even Quentin Tarantino, of course, John Mayer, have all worn it. How important is having that sort of cult, celebrity coolness to a brand? You've been at the brand for long enough to have an opinion on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm always sort of got two hearts on anything that's sort of cool cult, and I wouldn't go quite that far. I think the danger of that is always, like I say, it's very, very close to a fashion effect, and when you go into too much of a hype, that will necessarily end at some point, and you find yourself where you started. So I think I prefer that this becomes iconic over time, and it's always in a way a select piece that people will absolutely love, but that is not a reality on everybody's wrist. And I think this is one of the strengths of the Big Pilot, is that for us, as an icon, it fuels an entire product line
Yes.
in the watch collection of many customers who who are inspired by that link of that essential tool watch that is the Big Pilot, which really tells an ultra strong story about the utilitarian nature of a pilot's watch, like nothing else. You wear this watch in a meeting, and people immediately make the link to how this is basically a navigation instrument for the sky. And the design, you've got that big chunky onion crown, which is really inspired by obviously the pilots in gloves, being able to set a watch, the legibility of that lume dial, the leather strap, which really harks back to the big bulky straps being worn over the pilot suits. So it tells a very specific story, but for many people, is not the reality of what they are going to wear all of the time in their daily lives. It's a big watch, 46 mil, big crown, but it inspires an entire mindset around a product family of many more wearable watches, whereas the Big Pilot itself is kind of a select choice, quite a strong statement. And I hope that with that you maintain a status of a following an iconic status that you cannot achieve if you then break that out into billions of versions and 15 different sizes and stick the crown onto every single watch and so on. So
That reminds me of something you said earlier, where collectors of the Big Pilot that don't wear the watch. And what you're sort of saying there, it's an important watch and one that a lot of people own. But do you, in your sort of market research, are there people out there that only wear a Big Pilot all the time, or is it that sort of a statement that you pull out for occasions or particular moods? Is there a sort of a wearing pattern around the Big Pilot?
Yeah, definitely. And to be honest, personally, it breaks my heart when people collect watches and don't wear them. I mean, it's a choice, but I'd much rather have our products being worn. This was one of the amazing things that we saw, for example, with the digital display tribute to Paul Weber watches that we did for the 150th anniversary. We really expected those to be collector pieces to be displayed in beautiful cabinets. And it turned out we had a lot of clients who actually wore these on a daily basis, which is great. And I think this is what watches are made for. But I do think that, of course, there are people who have a Big Pilot in their watch collections because it's one of those go-to pieces if you're into sports classic iconic watch designs. But we have many others that wear Big Pilots on a daily basis, including ladies, which I still find striking every single time. But it's a huge statement of confidence. It definitely is.
Very cool. So we've talked about a few ambassadors, and one big one that you added to the lineup nearly 12 months ago is Tom Brady. How's that
Yeah.
going? How's that helped with, sort of the presence in the USA? How has the market responded to that alignment?
Yeah, so I mean, we're very fresh into starting the communication on Tom Brady, and the main sort of campaign has not yet been released. So we'll see that in the months to come. But for us, what I'm looking for in ambassadors is obviously an authentic relationship with IWC, and Tom's been a long term fan of the brand, and we'd spoken numerous occasions previously, and then when the opportunity arose, we met up, and I discovered his passion for the brand and actually how many pieces he already owned. It was amazing to see. And there was just this connection there that just worked in terms of mindset, in terms of values. And of course, it's great to have somebody, especially in the US, who has this sort of standing in sport to be able to become a brand ambassador, similar to what we experienced with Bradley Cooper, who really exclusively wore Big Pilot for about 5 or 6 years before we even started to talk. And that for me is the most organic fit, where you can tell a genuine story about a shared passion that just makes everything else so much more natural after that. And I think this is really the key to me, how we select and navigate this world of ambassadors.
I think that's a very, very cool approach and organic, as you say. And on that note of organic, we've got a few other things to quickly ask you, cautious of time. But one of our female podcast listeners actually messaged just a week ago asking our opinion on the Portofino Automatic 34, so the ladies model. And I thought we'd put it to you to ask what your favorite model is and potentially help guide her with her choice. So the one she's opted for is I guess it's the silver dial with the diamond markers and the gold hands and indices.
Yeah, absolutely. It's there's a couple of beautiful ones. I also really like the gold version with the hammered dial on the 34, which looks amazing on the wrist. It's one of those watches, the 34, that, and I often find it with ladies' watches. Ladies' watches are much harder to get a feel for, like on a tray or in a shop or on a display. This really lives on the wrist and the effect it has on the wrist, and that's something with a 34. I was really struck when this watch was properly the first event. I remember it was Zurich Film Festival, I think it was, when we saw it the first time on wrists, and it was amazing to see how that watch actually works when it's being worn. And the one piece that really surprised me is the olive dial stainless steel version on the green strap, which
Okay.
just tends to have so many different skin colors and expressions and looks, and it's just a really, really striking piece. So there's a couple there that
All right. Well, if we're going to ask anyone for advice, I think we've probably asked the best person. Now, before we wrap out, what we like to do is a little bit of a segment on the show. We kind of turn away from watches and just ask guests and ourselves something that we've been enjoying, recently to stay active, to stay sane, to stay entertained. Is there anything off the top of your head that you've kind of found enjoyment in outside of watches lately?
Yeah, absolutely. So apart from obviously trying every bit of occupational therapy with the kids to try and I was covered at the weekend as well and not go completely insane. One of the things we enjoyed is all the physical challenges that have been circling around social media. And I don't know if you tried a challenge, for example, where you have to do a full body rotation whilst balancing a trainer on your foot or a sneaker or whatever you
Oh,
call
we've
that.
seen this. Did you do it successfully?
Yes, you did it successfully. There's also this wonderful thing that you can do with your wife or boyfriend or girlfriend or partner, which is where you do this full sort of over the head and through the legs while standing up, without touching the ground, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Flying around our family WhatsApp groups and everybody making a complete fool of themselves by falling
Nice.
over in
Yeah.
the garden. I do enjoy those at the moment. I must say, I've just rediscovered the simple joy of trying to go around the table without touching the ground. Those kind of things we used to do in hostels back in the day.
Oh, fantastic. So fitness.
That's great.
And staying active. Well, that's all I have, Felix. Anything?
Yeah, I think that's as good a place to end it as anyone. Thank you so much for your time. We understand you must be incredibly busy at the moment, but it's
Yeah.
really an honor and a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thank you, and you please send the apology to my colleagues in operations whose meetings I've just missed. So
Oh, I'm so
my
sorry.
CEO with an angry look outside my door.
I think that's us done. Thank you so much and apologize for running late.
Thank you so much, guys.
Well, I think that was perhaps the most exciting phone conversation I've had in the last little while. I can't wait to see those new Portuguesers in the medal.
Or those new yacht clubs.
Yeah, are they Portuguese? I think they are. They're Portuguesers as well. Anyway, that's all we've got time for today. As always, if you want to get in touch with us, you can do it on Instagram, ot.podcast. If you want to send us a question,
Watch matchmaking,
more about IWC, what's the email address?
otthepodcast@gmail.com.
Bam.
And also, thank you to our producer, Major Tom Media,
Bam.
for putting this all together.
But most of all, thank you to IWC Australia for putting it together.
Yes, thank you.
And thank you to Chris Grainger. That was a real treat.
And thank you for listening, guys.
Thanks. Let's go now.
Over and out.